My children argued over my $12 million mansion while I lay in a hospital bed. They thought I was dying, until I whispered one word that left them with nothing. The darkness wasn't empty. It was heavy, a suffocating blanket woven from the rhythmic beep, beep, beep of a machine and the mechanical hiss-click of air being forced into lungs that refused to work on their own. I floated in that darkness, a consciousness trapped in a cage of flesh and bone that had suddenly decided to go on strike. I tried to lift a finger. Nothing. I tried to wiggle a toe. Nothing. I tried to scream, to roar with the voice that had once made union bosses tremble and grown men cry on construction sites, but the only sound was the steady, indifferent hum of the ventilator. I was Vivian King. I built the skyline of this city. I turned a failing masonry business into an empire. I was the Iron Lady of Beacon Hill, and now I was a statistic in a VIP suite at Mass General, a body to be kept alive or let go, depending on who was signing the checks. God, that noise is annoying. The voice cut through the darkness like a serrated knife. It was Diane, my daughter, my beautiful, vain, useless daughter. "It means she's alive, Di," another voice grumbled, lower, rougher. Simon, my son, my disappointment. "Barely," Diane sighed. I could hear the rustle of fabric, probably silk, probably Hermes, as she shifted in the uncomfortable hospital chair. Dr. Evans said there's been no change in 48 hours. The stroke was massive. The brainstem activity is, what did he call it? Minimal. "Minimal is something," Simon muttered. "Minimal means we wait." "Wait for what?" Diane snapped. "Wait for her to wake up and tell us she hates my hair? Or wait for the hospital bills to eat through the cash reserves? You know this suite costs $5,000 a night, right? That's my alimony payment, Simon. Gone. Every single night." "Don't talk about money right now," Simon hissed. "It's tacky." "Tacky? Please. You're the one who called your bookie from the hallway 10 minutes ago. I heard you, Simon. Give me a week, Sully. I'm good for it." Who is Sully? And why does he sound like someone who breaks legs? I felt a surge of rage, hot and sharp, spark somewhere deep in my paralyzed brain. Simon was gambling again. Of course he was. I had bailed him out 3 times. I had paid off the debts, bought out the failing restaurants, silenced the creditors, and every time he swore it was the last. Just one more hand, Mom. Just one more deal. He didn't have an addiction to gambling. He had an addiction to losing my money. "Shut up, Diane," Simon growled. "Focus. We need to talk about the house." "The brownstone?" Diane's voice changed. It softened, dripping with a sudden greedy reverence. "What about it?" "We need to list it," Simon said. As soon as we can. The market is hot right now. I talked to a guy, a developer. He says if we gut the interior, turn it into 4 luxury condos, we could get $15 million, maybe 16. "Gut it?" Diane shrieked. "Are you insane? That house is a masterpiece. The moldings alone are worth a fortune. No, we are not selling it to some developer who will put in gray laminate floors. I'm moving in." "You?" Simon scoffed. "You can't afford the property tax, Di. You're broke." Ken cut you off, didn't he? "He did not," Diane lied. I knew she was lying. I had seen the legal papers on her kitchen counter last week when I stopped by unannounced. Ken had filed for a modification of support. She was drowning in credit card debt and denial. "I'm moving in," Diane insisted. "I'll turn the library into a content studio. I'll host salons. It will be the headquarters for my brand. I just need to get rid of Mom's dusty old junk. Those heavy drapes? Gone. The antique rugs. Storage. It needs light. It needs energy. It needs to be sold," Simon yelled, his voice rising. "I need the cash, Diane. I can't wait for you to play influencer. I owe people. Bad people." "Lower your voice," Diane hissed. "She might hear you." "She can't hear anything," Simon said. I felt his presence move closer to the bed. I felt his breath on my face, smelling of stale coffee and fear. He leaned over me, Look at her. She's gone, Di. The lights are on, but nobody's home. The Iron Lady finally rusted shut. Oh. Simon, if I could move my right arm, I would have backhanded you into next week. I retreated. I pulled my consciousness back from the precipice of their cruelty and fell into the safety of memory. It was a trick I learned years ago on the high steel, when the wind was howling and the ground was 40 stories down. Don't look down, look back. I remembered 1984, the year my husband Frank died of a heart attack on a job site. I was 36. I had 2 small children and a company that was 3 months away from bankruptcy. The union boss, a man named O'Malley with a neck like a bull and a brain to match, had come to my office the day after the funeral. "Sell it, Vivian," he had said, smoking a cigar in my husband's chair. "Go home, bake cookies. Construction is a man's game. You'll get eaten alive." I had walked over to the desk. I picked up the cigar from the ashtray and crushed it into the wood. "Get out of my chair, Mr. O'Malley," I had said, "and put on a hard hat. We have concrete to pour." I didn't bake cookies. I built the Prudential Tower Annex. I built the harbor condos. And I bought the King brownstone. It was a wreck when I found it. A boarding house filled with rats and rot on the finest street in Boston. People laughed at me. Vivian's Folly, they called it. I spent 5 years restoring it. I stripped the paint from the mahogany banisters with my own hands. I sourced the marble for the foyer from a quarry in Italy. I filled it with art that spoke to me. Grit, history, beauty. That house wasn't just wood and stone. It was my resume. It was the proof that a woman could build a fortress, and now the vultures were circling the fortress. "We need to talk about the DNR," Simon said, his voice breaking through my memories. "The do not resuscitate?" Diane asked. "Dr. Evans said if she codes again, it could be violent to bring her back, ribs breaking, brain damage. Is that what she would want? To be a vegetable?" "No," Diane said slowly. "She hated weakness." "Exactly. So, if it happens, we let her go. It's the kind thing to do. And it speeds up probate," Diane added, her voice practical, cold. "If she hangs on for 6 months in this state, the medical bills will be millions. That comes out of the estate, Simon. That comes out of our money." "Right. So we agree. We tell the doctor, no heroic measures." I listened to them sign my death warrant. They weren't crying. They weren't holding my hand. They were doing math. I felt a tear leak from the corner of my eye. It was the only part of my body that obeyed me. "Look," Simon said, "she's crying." "It's just a reflex," Diane said, dismissing my grief as a biological glitch. "Dry eyes. I'll get a tissue. Don't touch it. You might smear her makeup. I want her to look good if people come to visit." She dabbed my eye with a rough paper towel. "It's not like she even liked the house," Diane said, throwing the tissue in the trash. "She just liked the power. She liked looking down on people from that balcony. We're doing the building a favor by selling it. We're setting it free." That was it. That was the spark. It started in my chest, a burning ember of pure, unadulterated fury. I liked the power? Yes, I did. I liked the power of knowing I built something that would outlast me. I liked the power of providing a home for 2 ungrateful children who had never worked a hard day in their lives. They thought I was gone? They thought the Iron Lady was rusted shut? I focused. I focused on the anger. I focused on the memory of Mr. O'Malley's face when I fired him. I focused on the weight of a sledgehammer in my hand. I pushed against the darkness. I pushed against the paralysis. I pushed against the heavy, suffocating silence of my own body. "Wake up, Vivian. Wake up and burn the ships." The heart monitor began to beep faster. Beep, 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 beep. "What's that?" Simon asked, his voice spiking with panic. "Why is the machine doing that?" Is she coding?" Diane asked, stepping back. "Should we call the nurse? Remember the DNR." "Wait," Simon whispered. "Look at her eyes." I felt the heavy lids flutter. It felt like lifting a steel beam with my eyelashes, but I did it. I opened my eyes. The hospital room flooded in. the harsh fluorescent lights, the beige walls, and at the foot of my bed, the two faces I had loved more than anything in the world, now twisted into masks of greed and terror. Simon froze. Diane gasped, her hand flying to her throat. They leaned in, terrified, mesmerized. They thought this was it, the final moment, the mother's blessing, the secret code to the safe. I stared at them. I saw them for exactly what they were, small, weak, broken. I couldn't move my head. I couldn't lift my hand, but I could speak. I had one word in me, one word that I had saved for this exact moment. I drew a breath, fighting the ventilator tube, forcing the air past my paralyzed vocal cords. "Sold," I whispered. The word hung in the sterile air of the hospital room like a guillotine blade that had just dropped, severing the cord between the past and the future. "Sold," I wheezed again, the effort tasting like iron and antiseptic in my mouth. Simon blinked. He looked at Diane. He looked back at me. His face wasn't registering the meaning of the word, it was registering the impossibility of my consciousness. He looked like a child caught stealing candy, but the candy was a $12 million brownstone, and the parent was supposed to be dead. "Mom," he stammered, his voice cracking. You're awake?" "She's delirious," Diane said quickly, her hand fluttering to her pearl necklace. "Look at her eyes, Simon. They're unfocused. She's just firing random synapses. It's a reflex, like a chicken running around after, well, you know." "I am not a chicken, Diane," I tried to say, but the words didn't come out. The ventilator tube was a gag. I could only stare at them. I narrowed my eyes. I focused all the fire in my soul into that gaze. "I see you." Simon took a step back. He saw it. He saw the Iron Lady staring back at him. "Sold?" Simon repeated, the word finally filtering through his panic. "What do you mean, sold? What did you sell?" I couldn't speak again. The effort had drained me. My heart monitor was racing, beep, 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 a frantic tempo that brought a nurse rushing into the room. "Mrs. King!" the nurse exclaimed, checking the monitors. "You're awake! Please try to stay calm. Your blood pressure is spiking." She turned to my children. "You need to step back. Give her air." "We're her family," Diane snapped, trying to regain her composure. "She was trying to tell us something. She said sold." "She's confused," Simon insisted, though he was sweating now. "Mom, just rest. We're here. We're handling everything. The house is safe. We're going to take care of it." I shook my head. It was a microscopic movement, barely a tremor against the pillow, but it was a negation. "No. Excuse me." The voice came from the doorway. It was deep, baritone, and familiar. It was the voice of a man who knew where all the bodies were buried because he had drafted the contracts for the cemetery. My children spun around. Standing in the doorway wearing a charcoal wool coat and holding a battered leather briefcase was Arthur O'Connell, my attorney, my friend, my executioner. "Mr. O'Connell?" Simon asked, confused. "What are you doing here? Did the hospital call you?" "No," Arthur said, stepping into the room. He didn't look at Simon. He walked straight to the side of my bed. He looked down at me, his blue eyes sharp and kind. "Hello, Vivian. You're right on time." He took my hand, the one that wasn't paralyzed, and gave it a squeeze. I squeezed back, weakly, but I did it. "She's awake, Arthur," Diane said, stepping forward, her socialite mask slipping back into place. "It's a miracle, but she's speaking nonsense. She thinks she sold something." "She did," Arthur said calmly. He placed his briefcase on the rolling table at the foot of the bed, right next to my chart. He clicked the latches open. Snap, snap. "What are you talking about?" Simon asked, a nervous laugh bubbling up in his throat. "Mom hasn't left this bed in 4 days. She hasn't signed anything. She's incapacitated." "Currently, yes," Arthur said, pulling out a thick file folder bound in blue legal tape. "But 14 days ago, she was very much herself. Were you not, Vivian?" I blinked once. "Yes." Arthur turned to face my children. He held the file like a shield. 2 weeks ago, on October 14th, Vivian King finalized the sale of the property located at 44 Beacon Street. The room went silent. The only sound was the hiss of the ventilator. "What?" Diane whispered. "No, that's impossible. We live there." "Well, Mom lives there. It's the family home. Who did she sell it to?" "The Boston Historical Society," Arthur said. "The deed has been transferred. The title is clear. The keys are to be turned over in 30 days. The contents of the home, the dusty old junk as you called it, Diane, have been cataloged and donated to the museum's permanent collection." "A museum?" Diane shrieked. "She turned my house into a museum." "Her house," Arthur corrected sharply. "It was never your house, Diane." Simon looked like he was going to be sick. He grabbed the footboard of the bed to steady himself. Wait a minute. Okay, so she sold it. That's crazy, but okay. If she sold it, where is the money? I watched Simon's eyes. I saw the calculation. He was doing the math. $12 million. Maybe 13. If the house was gone, the cash was liquid. Cash was better than a house. Cash could be wired to sully the loan shark in Southie within the hour. $12.5 million, Arthur said. It was a cash offer. Quick close. $12 million, Simon breathed. He looked at me, and for a second, I saw something resembling love in his eyes. It wasn't love for me, but love for the salvation I had inadvertently provided. "Mom, you genius. You knew the market was peaking. You cashed out." He turned to Arthur, his hand extended. "Okay, so the money is in her accounts? We have power of attorney. If she's incapacitated, we need to access those funds to pay for her care and to manage the estate." "You do have power of attorney," Arthur agreed, "for her personal checking account, which currently contains about $4,000. "Where is the rest?" Simon demanded. "Where is the $12 million? Arthur pulled a second document from the folder. "Vivian," Arthur said, looking at me, "do I have your permission to disclose the details of the King Trust?" I blinked once. "Do it." "The proceeds from the sale," Arthur said, his voice ringing with the clarity of a judge's gavel, "were not deposited into her personal accounts. They were wired directly into the Vivian King Women in Trades Trust." "The what?" Diane asked, her nose wrinkling as if she smelled something foul. "It is an irrevocable charitable remainder trust," Arthur explained. "The principal is locked. The interest and dividends are to be used exclusively to fund full-ride scholarships for women entering the construction trades in the greater Boston area, welders, electricians, masons, the women who actually build this city." Simon's face went gray. "Irrevocable?" "Irrevocable," Arthur confirmed. "Ironclad. Vivian set it up months ago. The sale of the house merely funded it." "But that's our inheritance," Diane screamed. She lost it. The veneer of the grieving daughter shattered completely. "That's my money. I spent my childhood in that dusty old house. I put up with her working all the time. I deserve that money." "You deserve what you earn, Diane," Arthur said coldly. Vivian was very clear on that. "This is undue influence," Simon shouted, pointing a shaking finger at Arthur. "You manipulated her. She's old. She wasn't in her right mind. We'll sue. We'll contest the will." "She isn't dead, Simon," Arthur reminded him. "There is no will to contest yet. This was a business transaction made by a sound mind. I have the video logs of the signing. I have the neurological report from her doctor dated the day before the sale certifying her competency. You can sue, certainly, but you will lose, and the legal fees will bankrupt you." "I'm already bankrupt," Simon roared. The truth finally exploded out of him. "I owe Sully $300,000, Mom. If I don't pay him by Friday, he's going to break my legs. Maybe worse. You did this. You killed me." He lunged toward the bed. "Change it. You have to change it." The nurse stepped in front of him. "Sir, back away from the patient." "She's my mother," Simon yelled, spit flying from his mouth. "She has $12 million giving scholarships to bricklayers? While her son is going to get murdered." I looked at him. My son. The boy I had taught to ride a bike. The boy I had bailed out when his first restaurant failed, and his second and his third. I looked at his terror. I felt a pang of sorrow, deep and ancient. But I didn't feel guilt. I had spent 40 years building a safety net for them, and they had cut it to shreds looking for gold. I tried to speak again. It was harder this time. The adrenaline was fading, and the exhaustion of the stroke was pulling me back down. "Work," I whispered. Simon froze. "What?" "Work," I wheezed. Arthur stepped forward. "I believe she's giving you career advice, Simon." Diane was sobbing in the corner, clutching her Hermes bag. "I'm going to lose the condo. Ken is cutting me off. I'll have to work at Neiman Marcus." "Actually," Arthur said, pulling one last item from his briefcase, "Vivian did leave something for you both. She wanted to make sure you had opportunities." He handed them each a glossy brochure. Simon looked at it. His hands were shaking so hard he almost dropped it. "North End Trade School, fall semester enrollment." "She paid your tuition," Arthur said, "for the plumbing certification program, Simon, and the electrical apprenticeship for you, Diane. She said if you want to be part of the family business, you should learn how it works, from the bottom up." Diane threw the brochure at him. It hit his chest and fluttered to the floor. "I am not being a plumber. I am a king." "Not anymore," I thought. "You're just Diane." "Get out," Simon hissed at Arthur. "Get out of here." "I'm leaving," Arthur said, closing his briefcase. "But the trust stands. The house is sold. And Vivian—" He looked down at me, his eyes soft. "You did it, Viv. You burned the ships." He patted my hand. "Nurse," Arthur said, "I believe Mrs. King's blood pressure is rising. Perhaps her family should leave so she can recover." "Out," the nurse ordered, pointing to the door. "Both of you, now, or I'm calling security." Simon looked at me one last time. There was no love left in his eyes, only the cold, dead stare of a predator who realized the prey had bitten back. "You're dead to me," he whispered. He turned and walked out. Diane followed, wailing about her social standing. The door clicked shut. Silence returned to the room. The beep, beep, beep of the monitor slowed. The ventilator hissed. I closed my eyes. The darkness came back, but it wasn't heavy anymore. It was light. It was the weightlessness of a job finished. The house was gone. The money was safe. My legacy wasn't in my children anymore. It was in the steel and stone of the city I built, and in the future, women who would build it after me. I drifted off to sleep, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't dream of construction sites or boardrooms. I dreamed of a sold sign swinging gently in the wind on Beacon Hill. The hallway outside the VIP suite was quiet, the kind of heavy, sterilized silence that usually precedes bad news. But for Simon and Diane King, the bad news had already been delivered, wrapped in a brochure for a trade school. They stood there for a moment, staring at the closed wood-paneled door. Diane was the first to move. She threw the brochure at the wall. It slid down the beige paint and landed on the linoleum floor. "He can't do this," she hissed, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and terror. "It's illegal. She was coerced. We need to call a lawyer, a different lawyer, a shark." "With what money?" Simon asked. His voice was hollow. He was leaning against the wall, sliding down slowly until he was crouching on his heels, his head in his hands. "Lawyers cost money, Di. We don't have any. We can contest it on contingency." Diane paced, her heels clicking frantically. "We tell them the estate is worth millions. They'll take the case for a cut." "It's an irrevocable trust," Simon mumbled into his hands. "Arthur O'Connell wrote it. The man wrote the zoning laws for the seaport. If he locked it down, God himself couldn't crack it open." Simon looked up. His face was a map of ruin. Sweat beaded on his upper lip, and his eyes were wide, focusing on something 1,000 miles away, or perhaps on a very specific, very dangerous man in South Boston. "I'm dead," Simon whispered. "Sully gave me until Friday. He said if I didn't have the cash, he was going to take it out in bone." "Oh, stop being dramatic," Diane snapped, pulling out her phone to check her bank balance, praying for a miracle that wasn't there. "Nobody breaks legs anymore, Simon. This isn't a movie." "You don't know Sully," Simon said. He stood up, his legs shaky. He looked at the elevator. He looked at the stairs. He looked like a trapped animal deciding which limb to gnaw off. "I have to go. I have to find a way to disappear." "You can't leave me." Diane grabbed his arm. "I have nowhere to go. Ken changed the locks on the condo this morning. I have my clothes in the car and $12 in my checking account." Simon pulled his arm away. He looked at his sister, the woman who had spent 40 years looking in mirrors, the woman who had mocked his failed restaurants while sipping wine he paid for with their mother's money. "Here's an idea," Simon said, his voice dripping with venom. "Go be an electrician. I hear Mom paid your tuition." He turned and ran toward the stairwell. The heavy door slammed shut behind him, the echo reverberating down the empty hall. Diane stood alone. She looked at the closed door of her mother's room. She looked at the brochure on the floor. North End Trade School. She kicked it. Then she burst into tears, not for her mother's illness, but for the death of her lifestyle. She walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and rode it down to the lobby, stepping out into a world that no longer cared who the Kings were. My recovery was not a miracle. It was a construction project. That is how I treated it. I treated my body like a condemned building that needed to be gutted and reinforced. The stroke had damaged the neural pathways on my left side, leaving my arm weak and my speech slightly slurred. The doctors said I might never walk without a cane. They said I should consider a long-term care facility. I told them to go to hell. I hired a physical therapist named Marcus, a former Marine drill sergeant who didn't care about my net worth. He cared about my range of motion. "Again," Marcus would bark as I struggled to lift a 5-pound weight. "Pain is just weakness leaving the body, Mrs. King." "Pain is a pain in the ass, Marcus," I would grumble, sweating through my t-shirt. "But I'm not quitting." I spent 3 months in a rehabilitation center. It was grueling. It was humiliating. Learning to hold a fork again is a humbling experience for a woman who used to sign million-dollar contracts. But I did it. I did it because I had something to live for. And for the first time in 40 years, that something wasn't my children. I didn't hear from them, not directly. Arthur O'Connell handled the calls. "Simon called the office," Arthur told me one afternoon, bringing me a smuggling contraband espresso. He wanted to know if the trust had a hardship clause. "What did you tell him?" I asked, taking the coffee with my good hand. "I told him the only hardship clause involved a hammer and a nail," Arthur smiled. He hung up. Rumor has it he skipped town for a few weeks, went to stay with a cousin in New Hampshire until the heat died down on his debts. He's back now, working. "Doing what?" "General labor, pouring concrete for a foundation in Dorchester. The foreman is an old friend of mine. He says Simon vomits every morning before shift, but he shows up." I nodded. It was a harsh lesson, but concrete is unforgiving. It teaches you respect. "And Diane?" Arthur sighed. "She's living in a studio apartment in Revere. She pawned the jewelry. She's working at the cosmetics counter at Macy's. Apparently, she's very good at selling anti-aging cream to desperate women." "She would be," I said. "She's been selling illusions her whole life." "Do you want to see them?" Arthur asked gently. I looked out the window at the Boston skyline. I saw the cranes in the distance. I saw the city moving, building, growing. "Not yet," I said. "They need to bake a little longer. They're still raw in the middle." 6 months later. The invitation was heavy stock, cream paper with gold lettering. The Boston Historical Society cordially invites you to the grand opening of the Vivian King Museum of Boston Architecture. Location, 44 Beacon Street. I sat in the back of the town car as it navigated the narrow cobblestone streets of Beacon Hill. My heart was fluttering. A sensation I hadn't felt since my first ribbon cutting in 1985. I was wearing a red suit, Chanel, because I earned it. I had my cane, the black walnut one, but I wasn't leaning on it. I was using it as an accessory. The car pulled up to the brownstone. It looked magnificent. The brick had been pointed, the black shutters gleamed, and the brass gas lanterns flickered in the twilight. A red ribbon was stretched across the front steps. A crowd had gathered, historians, city officials, students, and curious neighbors. Arthur opened the car door for me. "Ready, Iron Lady?" he asked. "Always," I said. I stepped out. The flashbulbs popped. I waved. I wasn't a celebrity, but in this town, if you own the bricks, you own the cameras. I walked up the stairs. The director of the Historical Society, a woman named Dr. Eris, beamed at me. "Mrs. King," she said. "Welcome home." "It's not my home anymore," I corrected her, looking at the plaque by the door. "It belongs to the city now." We went inside. They hadn't gutted it. They had honored it. The library was exactly as I had left it, but now the shelves were filled with blueprints of the buildings I had built, along with the history of the tradesmen who built Boston. My desk was roped off, set up as if I had just stepped away. But the best part was the second floor. They had turned the bedrooms, the rooms where Simon and Diane had slept, plotting my demise, into a gallery celebrating women in construction. There were photos of female welders, architects, and engineers. There was a wall listing the scholarship recipients of the Vivian King Trust. I walked through the crowd, shaking hands. I felt light. I felt unburdened. I realized that for years I had been holding on to this house as a mausoleum for a family that didn't exist. Now, it was a school. It was alive. I made my way to the balcony overlooking the street for the speech. As I looked down at the crowd below, scanning the faces, I saw them. They were standing at the very back, behind the velvet ropes near a hot dog vendor cart. Simon looked tan. He looked tired. He had calluses on his hands, and he was wearing a cheap suit that didn't fit him quite right, likely bought at a thrift store. But he was standing up straight. He wasn't slouching. He wasn't looking for an exit. Diane was next to him. She was wearing black, appropriate for a funeral, which I suppose this was for her. Her hair was pulled back simply. She wasn't wearing diamonds. She looked older, but she also looked real. She wasn't hiding behind layers of filler and pretense. They saw me. The crowd quieted. I leaned into the microphone. "Thank you all for coming," I said. My voice was a little raspy, but it carried. 40 years ago, a man told me to go home and bake cookies. I told him I preferred to mix cement. Laughter, applause. "This house," I continued, gesturing behind me, "was my fortress. I built walls to keep the world out. I filled it with things to prove I was worthy. But stone is cold, and things gather dust." I looked directly at Simon and Diane. They didn't look away. I learned, perhaps a little late, that a legacy isn't what you leave for people. It's what you leave in them. You can leave money and it will be spent. You can leave a house and it will be sold. But if you leave a work ethic, if you leave grit, that cannot be spent. That cannot be sold. I saw Simon nod, just once, a small, sharp movement. "This museum is for the builders," I said, "for the ones who wake up at 4 a.m., for the ones who come home with dirt under their fingernails, because they are the ones who hold the world up." I pulled a pair of golden scissors from the velvet cushion Dr. Eris held. "To the future," I said. Snip. The ribbon fell. The crowd cheered. The doors opened. I didn't go back inside immediately. I stayed on the balcony. I watched as the crowd surged forward. I saw Simon turn to Diane. He said something to her. She wiped her eye. Then they turned around. They didn't try to come in. They didn't try to beg. They turned and walked away down Beacon Street toward the T station. They walked like people who had shifts in the morning. I watched them go until they disappeared into the fog of the city. Arthur came up beside me. "They came," he said. "They did," I said. "Did you want to speak to them?" "No," I said. "Not yet. Let them work for it. Let them build something of their own first." I turned away from the street and looked back into the warm, glowing light of the museum. "Come on, Arthur," I said. "Show me the scholarship list. I want to see who we're sending to welding school." I walked inside, leaving the cold night behind. I had lost a house. I had lost $12 million. But as I listened to the sound of my cane tapping on the marble, strong, steady, rhythmic, I knew the truth. I hadn't lost anything. I had finally finished the job. The sold sign was gone, and the foundation was solid. Narrator. Sometimes, the hardest thing a parent can do is cut the safety net. But if you never let them fall, they never learn to fly. I'm Vivian King, and this was the story of my greatest renovation project, my family. If you enjoyed this story, remember to like and subscribe. And if you're waiting for an inheritance, maybe pick up a hammer instead.